Today's Warden's Watch episode is with John Anderson from Nevada. But I kind of got hooked up with John in a kind of a different way, that one of his fellow game wardens reached out to me, Victor Jordan, and just said, hey, John's got a really good case that, I think would be awesome on Warden's Watch. And I just jumped on that right away, John, because current cases, awesome cases, when another game warden thinks you have an awesome case, that's pretty complimentary. I will say that. When we get these cases, we're pretty proud of them, and sometimes we don't flaunt them ourselves. But when someone else reaches out to me and says, hey, you really should talk to John Anderson because he's got a really cool case that's pretty recent, and I think he'd be willing to share. So, and thank you for joining us on Warden's Watch, and I really appreciate Victor reaching out and sharing that, and thanks for sharing your story and your cases with us. Nevada's been kind of close to my heart. I've already done a couple with you guys and went out there for the IWC conference, the last conference we had in 2019. So just I really appreciate your state and the people that work for your agency.
Yeah, we have a small agency, but there's some talented people that work here. A lot of really great wardens, and I give a shout out to Victor for giving me the opportunity to present that case, and it's kind of what I've been doing as a game warden. It's really neat. I've been following your podcast, listening to all the episodes, and just thinking, man, that'd be really cool to get on there. So shout out to Victor for, giving me the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, no, that's like I said, it's the ultimate compliment when another game warden says, hey, you got to reach out to this guy because his cases are just are good and wants to share. And that's pretty cool about wanting to share for sure. So what is this case? Can you give it to us in not a nutshell? I don't want to say a nutshell. I want to hear details, man, because I've got Victor's blood boiling, and I'm sure it's going to get mine going, and our listeners.
Yes, it's a really neat case. It's definitely the highlight of my career so far. I've been a game warden now for almost 9 years. Most of it's been spent in this rural community in South Central Nevada. It's Lincoln County. It's a tiny little community called Panaca is where I live, but Lincoln County is more of a group of 5 communities. We border a county with millions of people, 2 million people, I think. And our county's got 5,000 people in the entire county. There's 5 little towns, and each one has about 1,000 people. So everyone knows everybody. And when something like this case happens, there's a lot of public interest. The economy of this county is significantly buoyed up by the hunting community. Out of Las Vegas, out of Reno, these units that border Utah have a lot of the same genetics and a lot of the same habitats as the Arizona Strip. So a lot of really big deer and really big elk come out of these units that I patrol. And those units are unit 231, 241, 242, 221 through 223. Those are the kind of the main units I patrol. And again, known for really big elk, really big deer. A lot of people, when they think of Nevada, they don't think of, trophy, beautiful mountainous animals. The units that I patrol are between 4,000 feet and 10,000 feet of elevation. And we got desert sheep, antelope, all kinds of stuff. So this particular case was in unit 231. I'd been a game warden out here for about 4 years, and I got a call from a local landowner who said he was out in his field just kind of looking around at his cows and saw 2 piles of brush, and he saw some crows and ravens on top of them. And he went over there, and before he even got there, he could smell the stench. And the stench I'm talking about.
I do.
Rancid. It's in Nevada in August, it's 100 degrees. And so a pile of meat that's been sitting there probably about a week under sticks and stuff is just rancid. So he smelled that, gave me a call and said, hey, this looks really fishy. It's on my private property. I don't know what it is, but it stinks. And it looks to me
literally
like there's an animal underneath these piles of sticks and brush. And so I said, yeah, I'll be out there. It's about 10 miles from my house. No more than that, probably 20 miles from my house as the crow flies. So I pull up to the property, and again, I can tell it right away. And I get out there and I start pulling these sticks off, and immediately I can tell these are 4/4 of an elk, and it's a large elk. It's a really big animal. Some of these bulls out here can be 800 pounds. So these are really big quarters, and they've deteriorated to the point where they're basically piles of maggots. And you know what that's like, digging into that.
Yeah, it's no fun.
When it's warm and it's stinky. But that's the job we do as a game warden. So roll up your sleeves and dig in. Automatically, the crime that I had at that point was waste. I thought someone shot this bull elk on private property and decided they didn't want the meat, or got spooked and left it. The fact that the sticks and stuff were on top of the piles made me think that they maybe were going to come back for it. Why else would they try to hide it? And they quartered it. So they went to the effort of removing the quarters. Didn't find the back straps, just all 4/4. So they took the back straps and then the pile. There was no head there. And so I spent a couple hours trying to find a bullet. And this was one of the most liquidy necropsies I've ever done. You're pulling it up. It's like the meat got barbecued and the meat's just falling off the bones. You like pick it up and it's just falls off, and there's maggots everywhere. And I'm digging through all that, and it's hot and it stinks. And through all that, all I couldn't find any bullets. All I could find was some broken ribs, where I could see a bullet had gone through, but all my metal detecting and stuff, I wasn't able to find anything. And so I started, as a game warden, that's what we're looking for initially on a case like that, is some type of evidence. So I was unable to locate a bullet. The head was missing. And so I started fanning out from there, looking in circles around there, trying to find something else. And I came to about 200 yards away. There was a spot on the ground that looked like the elk had been cut up there, right in that spot. And so I started looking around, spent about 15 minutes, digging, trying to find a bullet. I metal detected the area. And as I was metal detecting, I looked up, and this is where it gets pretty interesting. I looked up, and about 50 yards away on a fence post was a camera pointed right at the spot where this elk had been cut up. And, as a game warden, you're like, no, really? Like, this whole thing was caught on a trail camera. So I immediately went down to the landowner and was like, hey, are these cameras armed? And he's like, yeah. I said, have you looked at them yet? And he said, no, I haven't. So like a kid on Christmas, we went down and got those cameras. And he had the cameras out there. Yeah. The landowner has the cameras out there because he can get landowner depredation tags based on the number of elk that are utilizing his fields. So he's doing it for proof, so he can show us, hey, every night I got this number of elk that are coming in, and we'll compensate him and give him a tag that he can sell based on that, so he can compensate for his loss to his crops and stuff.
Gotcha.
So we plopped that SD card in his computer and started flipping through, and again, it was like anything you could ever want was there. We had a spotlight coming into the field at like 9 o'clock at night. You can see a big group of elk out there, and the camera's pointed right at this beautiful bull. And there's like 2 or 3 photos of the camera panning across, or the spotlight panning across this bull elk. And then there's a photograph of the elk halfway falling down. We got the shot of him falling down at night in a spotlight on this camera. And then a couple photos of all the elk running away and the bull still being there. Then about 2 hours later, you see into the field, and right in front of the camera comes an ATV and two people riding on this ATV. And these photographs are kind of blurry, so you can't tell exactly who it is. But you can tell it's two guys, and they're young. They look like they're in pretty good shape, and they're wearing flat brimmed hats. And we kind of call the kids from Utah that come over here and do some kind of nefarious stuff. We call them the flat brim army. So it was just the classic young kids that, you know.
So we're talking ball caps with flat brims.
Yeah, we call them the flat brim army. And so I think I had something near 30 photographs of them then cutting it up, putting it on the four-wheeler, dragging it out of frame over to where we must have found the carcass. And then it was a really neat get. There were two other cameras on the property that caught a couple other photographs of them just passing with the bull elk's head on the back of the ATV. And that in and of itself didn't solve our case because we didn't know who these individuals were, right? We just knew we had exact timestamps of when they were there, when it was shot. So now I knew that this animal, there was an open elk season, but it was for archery. And there's no way that they could have shot from where the spotlight was to there with a bow. So we knew it was a rifle that they used. And so now our crime's building a little bit. We actually a lot. We have two photographs of individuals, or photographs of two individuals, and the whole crime caught on trail camera.
That's
probably not very many wardens can say that, like, you know, their entire crime was caught on camera. It'd be like you're hiding in the bushes taking photograph of the crime as it's occurring.
Right.
It's all there.
Right.
And again, the only thing we didn't have is who are these people. So,
right.
What we did next was we did a media release with the photographs, and we put out in Utah, in Nevada, in southern Nevada, actually all over the place. This media release went out. I saw some Idaho newspapers picked it up and some other stuff. So it went all over the place. And it's just, can you identify these two individuals who killed a bull elk in Nevada illegally? And it was about 4 days later, we got an anonymous phone call that said, hey, check this kid out. And so the name that we got back, and I'm just going to use the first name, is Zachary. I'm going to leave his last name out of it, but take a look at Zachary. And so I started looking at his Instagram stories and photographs and his Facebook, his social media accounts. And I found a picture the day before this happened of him and this other kid who were heading out towards the Utah-Nevada border. That was the statement to do on their elk hunt. So he had a Utah bull elk tag. And this crime scene was about 12 miles into Nevada. And so things started adding up a little bit, started looking at his criminal history. This was his very first year off a revocation for killing 2 deer on 1 tag in Utah. So we had a criminal history with poaching.
Yep.
So started reaching out to some of his friends and trying to find that photograph, because if he killed this bull, he's going to be sharing that photograph to other people. And I found it really weird that he wasn't sharing it on his social media accounts. There were no pictures of this bull that he had killed, but we looked at his harvest report that he had already done, and he said that he did kill a bull elk in that unit. So working with some other people and some friends, I was able to get a photograph of that bull that he claimed to have killed in Utah, and then started looking back at all the elk that were in the field subsequent days to that, and got an exact match to the bull that he claimed to have killed in Utah and a bull that was in that field the day before during the day. And I got a really good photograph. His Royal, his G4 was split in an odd way, so it exactly matched up to the bull elk that was in the field a few days before, the one that was on camera.
Yeah.
And so we prosecuted him for that. And we don't get, so in Nevada, we have gross misdemeanor / felony statutes that we can use to prosecute poachers. And we don't, so if a person's convicted of a felony / gross misdemeanor, it's called a wobbler. On sentencing, the judge gets to decide what it is. If it's a gross misdemeanor and a felony, and he gets to decide that based on the facts of the case. And this was one of the first felony convictions that we'd had in Nevada in a long time. And we don't get a whole lot of those. So this case went really well. They actually pled down to that so that he wouldn't get any jail time. So he didn't get any jail time for it, but he got 6 years revoked, or 5 years revocation. He can't hunt or fish anywhere that honors the North American Wildlife Violators Compact. And then a $20,000 fine, which was a really significant fine. We were able to give that to Operation Game Thief, and we were able to get, I think, 2,000 of that we gave back to the landowner who was instrumental in allowing us to get all that information and brought that to us. We were able to get a reward out to him. And so that case kind of skyrocketed my career. And most of it was just luck that camera was there, but it was a really great case that we worked hard on, and we were able to put together a tremendous case. And then working closely with Utah DWR on that case, they were able to give us all the information on him and do interviews. I went with them when we first interviewed him, and just a tremendous case. And the fact that we were able to get a felony out of it, and then when we got the sentencing, again, there was a big media blast, and I think it went a long way in telling the kids in this area we have a lot of problems with the young people in southern Utah coming across and seeing Nevada as the Wild West. You can go over there and you can do whatever you want because, there's one game warden out there, or none. For a long time, there was no game warden out here. And I think it went a long way in telling those kids, hey, those guys take it serious. And there's a dang good chance they're going to catch you, and there's some serious punishments that come with it. So it was a really, really great case.
Yeah, well, that's the significance of that trail camera is just it just blows my mind. But I think when I was getting done, I always told my guys, act like you're always on camera, because you are. And sometimes
you get out to go to the bathroom and you're like looking around like, am I on camera right now?
Yeah, we were stashing a cruiser to run a decoy down the road at a seasonal house, and it was a very nice seasonal house. And the officer was like, "You don't like this place?" And I said, "No, it's fine. I'm just looking for the camera." So we both started looking for the camera, and sure enough, on the telephone pole, shining back in the house, there was that camera. So we found it, and I'm like, yeah, that's, and I'm sure they're fine with, having game wardens park in their driveway and that. And we actually made a shooting from the road case that day, right in that proximity. But it's always on my mind now. Where's that camera? And for you, I mean, I don't know if people understand when you saw that camera, it's you're excited, but you're like, is that on? Is the SD card filled? What am I going to get out of this? The potential is huge, but what is it going to deliver? And then when you saw those pictures, that's just, and then you're thinking of everything else you got to do. That ATV, is there anything, special about that ATV? Is there anything special about those hats?
We tried really hard to, like, I talked to the FBI, some other photograph analysis databases to see if we could get those photographs cleaned up in any way to get a little more definition as to who is this person. And we couldn't. They said, based off of the fact that it's at night and the original quality is not great. This was before some of the really fancy cameras that we have now that, have really high definition photographs.
Right.
This one was, kind of the newer versions or the older versions of trail cameras. So we weren't able to clean it up, but still, I mean, it was all there. And once we proved that was the bull, I mean, they had no defense. I mean, here are you. And then there was this photograph one of the photographs depicted a really blurry symbol on one of his shirts that we were able to match up to his Instagram account and show that he was wearing that shirt on that night.
Yeah.
So,
All the pieces
really,
drop it in.
really neat.
Yeah.
And not, not all cases end up like that.
Oh, no.
I should say no cases end up like that. You don't have a crime, like one of the biggest of your career in your area. I mean, this one matched all the criteria of just nonsense that comes with poaching at night with a spotlight, wasting all the meat, private property, wrong weapon,
across state lines.
I mean, it was the whole gamut of everything that we as game wardens try to get out there and bust. And sometimes I think, the good Lord cares about those cases.
Yeah.
And I think he cared about this one. That camera being there, that was no coincidence, So,
I totally agree with you. Totally agree. Sometimes he wants the good guys to win, and there's a reason for it.
Yeah, yeah. And since then, I've talked to this kid, and I think this has gone a long ways in helping him turn his life around.
Good.
At least I hope it has. And I've seen him at some different places, and he's since gotten married and has a kid and a job, and things I think are going pretty good for him. So I hope that helped him realize, I got to grow up. I gotta,
and
start
families
taking this
make
stuff seriously.
A big difference. I think of one of the poachers I chased in my younger years, and he's flying pretty dang straight as far as I can see. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, what changed?" He's like, "I had a kid, and I didn't want him to hunt the way I hunted. I wanted him to be proud of the deer that he shot. I wanted him to be able to talk about that hunt and not, that he whacked it at night and then took it into the barn and dressed it off and, tagged it the next day or something. And, and then everybody knows you're a poacher." He goes, "I don't want my kid to grow up that way." So that was a pretty substantial point in his life. And let's get back into your history, because you shared that a little to me too, and why you became a game warden, your first contacts with game wardens, because you got a little bit of that history too.
Yeah, I got an interesting history. I grew up in a tiny little town called Matlock in Washington State. It borders right up on the Olympic Mountains. And you could definitely say I'm my dad's kid. My dad, from a very early age, he wasn't raised by hunters. He wasn't raised by outdoorsmen. He was raised in a suburban, home with a mom and dad and brothers, and him and his brothers, for some reason, just wanted to be outside all the time. And they didn't live in the middle of the woods. They kind of lived in a community. So he just had an affinity towards the outdoors and to hunting, but he had no mentors. He had no one to tell him, this is the right way to do it. And so, and his connection to the outdoors goes even deeper than that. It's more like a connection with wilderness survival skills and stuff like that. So he was chipping arrowheads at a really young age. He was building bows and arrows and hunting the neighbors' cats. Just anything that he could do to get in the wild. And so when he became old enough to have a car, he wanted to get out and go hunting. And he didn't. I don't think he even knew that there were laws at that age. He just knew, man, the Native Americans, that's what they did. And so he built a flintlock muzzleloader rifle from scratch, and said, "I'm going to go kill a deer." And I've looked into this, so the statute of limitations is over. But the very first deer that he killed, it was in Mount Rainier National Park. As like an 18-year-old kid, he went up into Mount Rainier National Park and poached a doe and took it home and skinned it out. And I'm sure he knew it was illegal, but I don't. That's just who he grew up as. And I talked to him about this, and he was like, "Oh yeah, and the elk too." And I was like, "The elk?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think I killed an elk in Mount Rainier National Park as well." I was like,
"It was pretty good hunting there."
yeah, it's a national park. I mean, that's like going into Yellowstone and poaching an elk in Yellowstone.
Yeah.
So, but it was never big bucks. It was never it was dad wanting to be an outdoorsman and not really having any direction or anything. And so, hey, I saw a deer up there one time. I'm going to go shoot it with my homemade flintlock. So, yeah. And so that's my connection to the outdoors, is my dad's passion for anything related to wilderness survival and outdoor survival skills. And I think he's really proud of what I've become. I know he's really proud, but now he teaches outdoor survival skills at wilderness gatherings and arrowhead shipping classes and all kinds of stuff. So he's really gone that way. Nice. This is a pretty interesting story, and I had to disclose this in my background investigation. So my dad, my very first time I ever met a game warden, I was probably 9 years old, and I passed hunter safety in Washington at the time. I don't know what it is now, but as soon as you could pass hunter safety, you could get a hunting license and you could go hunting. So again, my dad's still into the home-laid flintlock muzzleloader thing. And so he built this, but he'd probably built 15 by the time I was older. And so all us boys, our first deer were killed with flintlock muzzleloaders that dad built.
Cool.
And so I go out to, fulfill this thing as a kid, to go out with dad and kill your first deer with a muzzleloader. And I had seen a buck that day. I remember it like it's yesterday. And dad got me lined up on it. And it was the last day of the hunt. And we weren't very wealthy. So it meant a lot to get that meat. It was the last day and I got lined up on it. And for some reason I stuck my pinky inside the pan as I was resting. And that flintlock rock came down and just laid open my pinky. And the gun didn't go off and the deer ran off. I mean, you could make a good argument. A 9-year-old shouldn't be shooting a deer, but anyway, I did, and I screwed up and the gun never went off and my finger was bleeding, and we were going home. And on the way home, there was a little apple orchard and dad saw some deer out there, and it's my tag. And so he gets out and was like, I'm just going to fill your tag real quick. So in the headlights, across the highway into an apple orchard on private property, he shoots at this doe, and the doe runs off and runs up into the brush. And dad was like, I think I hit it, but I didn't hit it very good. Let's come back and look for blood. So the hunt's over. It was supposed to be, it's my tag. He obviously can't fill my tag. And we come back the next morning and we're sitting there and we're getting ready to hike out there and look for blood. And all of a sudden 2 game warden trucks come tearing in. And they're like, hey, were you guys the ones here last night that shot across the highway at night? The neighbor here reported it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm remembering this because it was really scary. And my dad was like, my dad's really principled person when it comes to honesty. Maybe not when it comes to poaching back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was like, yep, that was me. And that beautiful flintlock muzzleloader, they seized it from him. He got a great big fine and got his hunting and fishing privileges revoked for 5 years.
Wow.
It was a big deal for me as a kid. And that was my first time I ever met a couple game wardens. And since then I've talked to that game warden, and I said, I was that kid. Do you remember that? And he was like, yeah, I remember that. It's really cool that you're a game warden now. So yeah. Anyway, that was my first experience with game wardens, was my dad getting put in handcuffs. So
is that kind of when you thought maybe I'd like to do this someday, John?
No, not at all. I was like, those guys are jerks. Those guys, I was not, I was scared. I was like, my dad's gonna go to jail. Yeah. They didn't take him to jail. They let him go home. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe they'd take him to jail if I wouldn't have been with him, because then you got to
possibility. What are we gonna do with the kid?
Right.
We're not gonna take him to jail.
Yeah. So since then, I graduated high school, and we were always, I think that straightened my dad up, that experience.
Mm.
But I mean, growing up, we didn't have electricity. We lived in the middle of nowhere. Our closest neighbors were, you know, a mile away or so. And that's the way my dad wanted to live. He wanted to live, you know, in the middle of nowhere and live off the land and have a garden and chickens and goats and stuff and just live self-sufficiently.
Yeah.
And we had solar panels and we'd start up the generator to watch a movie or whatever. And I mean, my dad would give us, when we got home from school, we were allowed to keep our 22s in our room, but my dad would give us, he'd always keep the bullets. And so he'd give us 222 bullets when we got home from school or in the beginning of the day, you know, during the summer or something, or on a weekend. And we'd be gone the rest of the day, just terrorizing the countryside. I can honestly say, you know, we'd probably shoot grouse out of season and do some different things. I think it speaks to the importance of having mentors for outdoorsmen and people to teach them how to do it right.
Right.
Because I mean, my dad, he came into it with just the idea of, hey, I want to survive off the land, and more of a subsistence type mentality, which doesn't fit into the North American model of wildlife management, except maybe in Alaska. You know, in Alaska, there's some subsistence lifestyles that live that way, but I mean, down here, we have game laws. We have, you know, things that if every single person wanted to live that way, we'd have no game.
And that came into question a lot with this whole COVID thing. I mean, our agency and many other agencies got questions on that, where they were going to, you know, suspend deer season so everybody could go out and sustain. And you're right, it doesn't fit into the wildlife management plan, because we would deplete our populations very quickly if we were trying to live off of that, because frankly, we have too many people trying to live off a natural resource that it would fail. So, but that certainly came into knowing you were doing it back then is very interesting, because a lot of people are gravitating back towards that right now.
Yeah. So I graduated high school and I went to Central Washington University for a couple of years. Didn't have a whole lot of direction. Failed out of a lot of classes and probably had too much fun. Ended up kind of cleaning up and getting active in my church and deciding to go on a mission for my church, and went to Canada on my mission, spent a couple years up there, and met a guy up there that kind of influenced me to be able to, he was a forest surveyor in Canada.
Yeah.
And he said he loved his job. He spent his whole life out in the mountains. So that's kind of when I said, hey, I want to do something like that. I want to be out in the mountains in some capacity, because that's where my passion is. And then came home, went to school at Utah State University, and got a job with Alaska Fish and Game. I went up there to work on some houses, and that kind of fell through, and went down to the Fish and Game office and was like, hey, do you guys have a job? And they're like, yeah, we can put you out at a weir. So I lived at a weir in the middle of nowhere for 2 summers and lived in a tent and counted fish and fished. And that's the first game warden that I ever shadowed, was in that capacity. So I spent 3 or 4 days with a game warden up there who was working on some guides up there that he didn't want them to know he was there. So he was living at our weir kind of undercover and watching those guys. And just making sure they were following the laws, but he was kind of posing as a weir worker. And so I took him around and we kind of spied on them together and, you know, got up on top of a mountain and just watched and made sure that they were following all the laws. And he ended up getting a pretty good citation out of it on some stuff that they weren't following. And that's where I was like, man, that's cool. This guy gets to just play out in the mountains and do like detective work and do it in the capacity of the outdoors, which is where I wanted to be. And so I came home and I decided that's what I wanted to be. I came home from those 2 summers in Alaska. The second summer is when I hung out with that guy. And then I dove right into it, and I took all the law enforcement classes I could take. I ended up getting a wildlife degree from Utah State University. I interned with Utah DWR for a couple years. It was like 6 months. They have a law enforcement intern position, and
Nice.
I did that, and I think I did a really good job. They wrote me a letter of recommendation, and I got married right about that time to my wife, and we decided, these jobs are super competitive. I want to be game warden. So any state in the Western United States that opened up, we were going to apply for. I wanted to live in the West because that's where my family is, but I was willing to, any state, maybe except California. But, so I just dove right into the application process, and Nevada was the first state that started hiring. And so we applied there, and I think I got hired about 4 months after I graduated.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and the rest is history. I got hired for a position down in Boulder City in the city, and didn't want to be there. It's right outside Reno, or right outside Las Vegas, and you're basically in that position. You're a boating officer, so you're in charge of life jacket enforcement and operating under the influence and drowning deaths and boat accidents and all kinds of stuff. Yep. And that's not really where I wanted to be.
Right.
So probably about 2 months after field training got over, this position came open, and moved up here, and I've been here ever since. Love it.
Nice. And how long
love what I do. Huh?
How long do you have on? How many years?
9 years.
9 years.
Working on 9.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. And I love the investigations part of it. That's where my passion lies. Is I write tickets and I actively patrol and stuff like that. But when there's a case like that case where there's a dead elk and no suspect, that's where I get excited.
Yeah.
That's where I really dive in and just attack a case like that with tenacity and just do everything. It's something I've always thought. If there's a crime, there is evidence. There is evidence of that crime. There is a way to solve that case, and it's up to us to figure out, how do I gather that evidence? Where's that evidence at?
Right. And generally witnesses too. Whether they were told about the incident. Because let's face it, those guys that do this stuff and don't talk about probably never get caught. But most of them, they want to tell people. They want to tell them about this big elk. They want to do that type of thing. So that certainly aids us, and it's just human nature. But I would agree. I just the investigation part to start turning over rocks, and you may turn over 100 rocks, and all of a sudden you get a piece of information, and it sends you to the rest. It's I got this piece, and that leads you another piece to another piece, and pretty much you're building a case. And just like that elk case, you go through. I mean, you start from the necropsy to looking for that bullet, going through a soup, a stinky, nasty soup. And I don't know if listeners can really understand what that is about, but it is probably the worst thing. One of our officers, I don't know if I posted a picture. He used to carry a hazmat suit with him, basically, and put his hazmat on to go into some of those things. And he's smart to do that.
Yeah. There's the old trick of taking the Vicks vapor rub and rubbing it under your bottom lip.
Yep.
Just so you have that intense smell to kind of mask. Yeah, you're gagging right now.
I'm gagging. I had a trainee once when he cut into the moose, it blew his hair right back because there was so much pressure in there, and he spent the next 10 minutes gagging.
Yeah, I mean, people don't realize that game wardens, we take a case from the tip to prosecution to the whole thing. Like a police agency, when they have a murder, there's 10 different parts of that agency that are working that case from beginning to end. I mean, we do the job of the coroner. We do the job of the autopsy guy, the technician. We gather evidence. We take that case from nothing to prosecution, or we don't solve the case. It's all up to us.
Right.
That's put on our plate. And that's what I love about this job is you watch CSI and that's what we get to do, but we get to do it in the mountains. And we get to do it with elk and deer and outdoorsmen. And, sometimes the job sucks, when you're, you know, you're dealing with the politics of stuff, or, you know, report writing and spending time in the office and crunching numbers. But that all disappears when it's 4 a.m. and it's the opener of the deer hunt and you're watching the sunrise, you know, and you're just like, man, I get to do this for a living. I get to be up here. I get paid to do what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
You know? It's an incredible career field. It's definitely got its downsides. My wife and I were talking about this last night. I feel like sometimes it feels like your only friends are other game wardens, you know, like no one wants to get close to you. Like everyone's like cordial and nice, or not. Some people absolutely hate you, but most people are pretty cordial. You know, they say hi to you in the store and stuff, but no one wants to like spend meaningful time with you because
who wants
you're
to hunt
like
with the game warden, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we're all passionate about that, you know. We're all hunters, or most of us are.
Most of us
we want to be out there, and we care a lot about, you know, being in the outdoors and harvesting quality animals and fishing and boating and all that.
Being part.
Sometimes that's a tough part of the job, is you feel, hey, no one's really wants to get that close to you.
Yeah. Now you got to treasure those good civilian relationships too, because I think it keeps us balanced. I think all law enforcement should have, you know, a good civilian friend, because you're right. It has a tendency, because that's when you start hanging out with, you know, your law enforcement friends, your game warden friends more often. And sometimes I think we see things narrow-mindedly. We put the blinders on, so to speak, and that civilian friend you have brings it back to reality. The guy that produces this show, Total Civilian, he's been such a mentor in just kind of guiding the other side, that now that I'm seeing that I'm retired a little more, that I'm actually kind of hunting with other hunters. They're getting a little more accustomed to hunting with a game warden, because now I have time to actually spend. But no, I think it brings us some balance into our lives. So I think that's really important. So that's pretty cool. You've had some other cool cases too, huh? I mean, let's dive into some of these other cases, because you have had a stellar career in 9 years. Some of the stuff you shared with me, I got excited about this elk case, and you've had some other dynamic things. So I still can't believe that camera was there, though. That's gonna be one of the top 10 Warden Watch case reviews there. The trail camera right there on the fence post, and oh my goodness, I just
It's one of those situations where you're like, no way. Are you kidding me? It's like having a witness standing there watching the whole thing. But yeah, I've had a lot of success in this area. It sat dormant for, I think, 5 years without a warden at all. And this area it's just prime for making cases, because of the local culture is all about hunting and all about the acquisition of big elk and big deer. And so that passion and that culture is always going to come with poaching and people doing it the wrong way to try to get that notoriety and that fame. But just doing it how it's not supposed to be done, how, you know, is a not sustainable way to do things. Right now in the courts, I can't talk about these cases because they're active, but I have 7 felony, and when I say obviously these are Lincoln County cases, but no, and I try to take a mentorship role with a lot of the younger wardens. So if I get a case and they're kind of in it, I like to try to keep it with them and then take it through. So cases that I'm working on right now, I think I have 7 felony prosecutions that are actively going on right now. And I think there's 2 more that are going to be added in the next few weeks to that. So that's a lot of case report writing, a lot of stuff. Another case I was going to talk about was one that happened back in 2013. It was the very first year I got up here. And I had absolutely no clue what I was doing when I got up here. So this area. I got out of field training, and most of my training was done on the boats on the water. So
Gotcha.
anything that I
And how much
had
water do you have
learned, I
in your
learned from,
patrol?
huh?
How much water do you have in your patrol?
I have 5 little lakes, Nevada
Okay.
sized lakes, and these
Nevada
lakes
size.
are. I mean, you can't water ski on these lakes. They're more
Okay.
like ponds.
They're more of a
Yeah,
pond.
yeah. There's decent fishing, but they're little.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of said, hey, go to town up there, have fun. And the closest warden to me is an hour and a half away, and he's in a different region, so he has a different command structure than me. The wardens in Vegas are 3 hours away. So in a way, it was like super intimidating, but super fun at the same time. Just learning a brand new area. I'd never been here before. I just knew there were big elk and big deer and desert bighorn sheep, and that's where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
So this case was started by a Facebook post that was tipped to me, and it was a photograph of 2 does laying on the ground with um, 3 people posing with these 2 deer. And the timestamp on it's like April. And there's obviously no hunts in Nevada in April. And so the guy said, hey, you might want to look at this.
Yeah.
So started looking into the individual, that his Instagram account, and it was all in Spanish. So I was able to get it translated by a Lincoln County deputy that knew Spanish, and we were able to find out that they were going to cut them up and eat them for carne asada, and they were going to have a big party. So we knew that we had to get in there and get a warrant before all these deer got ate. They were going to have a big party and eat these deer. So I'd never written a warrant, and I worked with some wardens that had been on a while to, how do I go about writing this thing called a warrant? And so we put together a warrant pretty quick and got in there, served the warrant. It was my first warrant service, and we just found so much stuff in this house, like a bag full of random songbirds and stuff that had all been processed, like tiny little like smaller than a quail, but like full size little birds, like a whole bag of them. We found lots of poaching type stuff, like spotlights and different stuff, but no deer. We didn't find any deer. But the guy that was there said, hey, this guy came up from Las Vegas and he asked if he could hunt. And I told him yes, but I didn't know it was legal. These are all undocumented immigrants.
Okay.
A whole group of them that were living in that area, and none of them spoke English. And so we started looking at this individual who supposedly came up, and we started looking at his social media accounts, and found out that there was this whole network of undocumented immigrants that were getting resident hunting and fishing privileges, and buying deer and elk tags and just going to town on Nevada's wildlife. I mean, their Instagram and social media posts, this was before Instagram, so it would have been just Facebook. But their Facebook posts had pictures of them holding swans, holding all types of different like loons and just random stuff that most people wouldn't even look at as game animals. And
Basically, if it was alive, they were killing it.
yeah, they were going all over the state, and we had something like 15 to 20 photographs of different animals that this group of, and it turned out being, I think, close to 6. It's been a while since this case, but I think it was 6 or 7 guys, all undocumented immigrants, who were killing animals all over the state of Nevada, sometimes with tags, sometimes not with tags. But even the tags that they had were fraudulent because they could not have resident privileges. In Nevada, if you are a resident, you have a pretty good chance of drawing a deer tag. All of our hunts here, there's nothing over the counter. except for mountain lion. All of our deer, elk, antelope, bighorn sheep tags, these are all draw tags. And so they're extremely coveted, especially for different areas. These areas right here as a non-resident, in unit 231.22, I mean, you could put in for 20 years and not draw realistically.
Wow.
And so these people getting, as non-residents, getting resident tags, and like they would get an area 22 tag and harvest it in 24, or an area 10 that's really easy to draw and harvest it in the wrong unit. And so we started looking at where there was one ringleader of this group. We started looking at his residence. He's the one that came up and shot the deer on the original photographs. So we started digging into him and his Instagram account or his Facebook account, and found out that he's probably the ringleader of this outfit. And so we got another search warrant, and we teamed up with Las Vegas Metro on this one because this guy was a pretty bad guy. We knew that he had some ties to cartels and some other stuff down in Mexico. And so we hit this house with Las Vegas Metro SWAT. And that was a really neat thing to watch. I mean, they go hard. They go really hard. I mean, there's flashbangs, breaking down doors, guys going in windows. We had to, our whole job on the service of this warrant was to block the street off. I mean, we let the professionals do this one.
Yeah.
So they hit that house hard because of who the individual was. And the house was a treasure trove of illegal big game. So we an entire freezer in the back full of what we believe, I mean, individually packaged, you know, the look, not taken to a butcher, not done professionally, but just Ziploc bag after Ziploc bag of just random meat. Some of it's ducks,
labeled,
geese. No, just everything thrown in there. Yeah. So we didn't, I mean, there was so much meat in there, we knew it was from multiple animals. And so we sent it off to a DNA lab. We sent off 5 samples from different parts of the freezer, and they came back to 5 different deer. So we didn't know, we still don't know how many deer were in that freezer. So we had a successful prosecution on all those guys. We got, I think, 5 or 6 gross misdemeanors, a bunch of misdemeanors, hunting, fishing privileges taken away from 5 or 6 different guys for a long time. And I think that case did a really good job of letting undocumented immigrants know that just because you're here doesn't mean you have resident privileges in our state. So they have to apply as a non-resident if they're going to get those hunting and fishing privileges in Nevada. So yeah, and there was another part of that case that was really odd, and we don't know what happened with it. There was when we searched the house, there were multiple books of names after names after names after names of people, and it was our belief that this house, it was empty when we hit it. There was no one home, but there was lots of rooms with lots of different beds. I mean, the house could have slept. It probably should have only slept 4 people, but it could have slept 20. So we believe that it was like a safe house for human smuggling and human immigration and stuff like that, and that they were utilizing elk and deer and Nevada's wildlife to feed all these people that were in this home. So pretty interesting case. And that case took about 2 years to investigate that case with wardens all over the state. Those photographs that we found on their accounts, we sent those out to wardens who patrolled those areas that we thought they were in, and we matched a lot of those photographs up to the exact spot where they took those photographs, with rocks that were laying on the ground and litter that was still there, and a tree in the background. We were able to match all those up and really find out where they had killed those animals at and where the illegal tags they had, what area they were for. So, and that was like 1 year on in my career. So that was a really great case.
Yeah.
And then props to the wardens that were on 10, 15 years at that time that really took that case and took it places I probably couldn't have done. Like that case started in Nevada and Lincoln County with a tip that was given to me. But the older wardens and the more experienced wardens took that and just ran with it and made some tremendous cases. And I think that case has probably done a lot in that Hispanic community of Las Vegas and letting everyone know, what you have to do to be able to do this right. So,
absolutely.
Really great case.
Yeah. And it's funny how that just rings through. I mean, the case we did across the border with Canada, again, had a very big impact in that same type of community. So I can totally see what you're saying is it rings true to a different, reaches different people to a different way.
Yeah.
That's probably pretty much the only way you can reach them, because they don't want to strive to do it the right way. And if they are feeding them, that's why I was wondering about labeling. I wonder, you're probably absolutely right, because what do they care if it's elk, deer, goat, if you're feeding it a smuggling, human trafficking, if you're feeding that out, you don't care. If you want to have a piece of elk, you're going to write elk on it, no matter if you butcher it or someone else butchers it. So that lends if you, and again, timing's everything, and you could have hit that right and had a whole bunch of human smuggling. Did you guys recover drugs out of that house? I'm just curious, because that usually runs over. No?
Not that I remember. I don't remember recovering any drugs.
Yep.
No, it wasn't a residence. That became very apparent right away. It wasn't that someone lived there all the time. So it was just like an empty house, and that all that stuff was turned over to ICE.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't know what happened from there as far as what they did with that information and stuff.
Certainly took a cog out of their system, though, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's a result of just some pictures on Facebook that are sent to you to again start that investigation, and then another
and that's how it is with most of these cases. We start with a little tip, and it just grows and grows and grows into something that you never knew it was going to go there. It's amazing how some of these cases turn out, and where there's one, there's probably five.
Right.
So.
But it's great that you bring that to the listeners, telling them about how our cases actually, we're the CSI there. We're collecting all that evidence. We see it through. We've sent it to the DNA lab. They send it back to us. Now we're matching. We have 5 different deer that come out of that freezer. Now when we're prosecuting it, that this 5 deer that we can prove. It's just it's watching that CSI and bringing it from the crime to the court. And that's what game wardens do. I mean, some of the best training I had was homicide school. I went to homicide school made for people, and I applied that to animals, and it was a dynamic course. And then we as game wardens have some of those, Pennsylvania has a great course on forensics, doing the CSI stuff, and a lot of the states take advantage of their expertise and send officers there to get that expertise to bring it home, so we can collect it, and we know how to collect it. We know how to label it, and taking that time. And with hunter-related shootings as well, so detailed the investigation has to be. And sometimes it may be a murder, and you're probably working side by side with maybe a homicide detective and doing the same type of work, because you don't know until the absolute end. So it's really interesting that you brought that out, and then you can share from the beginning to the end of it, especially with these cases that are so detailed, John. That you're actually picking DNA. You're actually identifying the individual elk by, a fork on his left G4. That's that's the fingerprint. That's the fingerprint. That's the identification, and that's great work. And just it gets me fired up, and that you're doing this work, that game wardens do this work nationwide, and that people listening from Maine to Washington State, we do it very similarly everywhere. And I'd say we're all cut from very similar cloths, because when I hang out with them, these are my brothers and my sisters, and that's
Absolutely.
and it feels like home.
Yeah. I some of the coolest classes I've taken on forensics are um, the forensic entomology, where you're working with maggots. And you just look at a pile of maggots and you think there's not a lot of evidentiary value there, but I mean,
Yeah, what state
from
are you in?
yeah, what stage are they in? You can get a time of death
Yeah,
from that and know exactly when this went down based on the maturity of those eggs and different types of bugs that are there.
yeah.
I mean, we're not just a bunch of hunters that got hired. We have degrees.
Mm,
We we're most of us are pretty smart guys. That work really hard at our craft and um, utilize whatever resources are available.
no doubt.
And those resources are constantly changing. So we're
Mm,
going to classes to learn how to work with technology um, and,
yeah.
and, and develop suspects from that stuff. And um, you know, bullet forensics and ballistics and
Mm,
digging bullets out of a carcass and be able to identify which gun that came from.
right.
I mean,
And you're right. The change in technology. When I went to photography school at the academy, it was film.
yeah,
know, and through the progress of years, the digital photography, always having a camera with you because it's on your phone now has been awesome. Awesome towards the end of my career. I'm taking, and take as many pictures as you want. You're gonna have to have that film developed, and it costs a lot of money, and the department really doesn't want to do that. So just don't take as many pictures as you want. Take just
yeah.
the perfect picture every time, because you
And
only
now that's
get one
completely
take.
changed, and we
Yeah,
take thousands and
thousands
delete what doesn't. Yeah,
video.
yeah.
Some technology has been awesome, awesome for sure. Um, yeah. So, any other cases, especially, do you have any involving this new technology or anything like that, or anything you want to share that's current or not, or yeah, you had three
Um,
cases, and we can go to number three, for sure.
okay, let's just jump right into the third one I wanted to go over, and this one just got adjudicated, so this one's really fresh in my brain.
Awesome.
Um, and it gets into a little bit of the technology that we use. We don't want to give out all our secrets, and but that's where the future of all this is working with technology
Yeah.
um, and developing suspects in ways that 10 years ago was even not even thought of. So
Mm,
um, yeah, so this case um, happened in 2017. We didn't find out about it until 2019. So in 2017, a kid um, came across the Utah Nevada border from the St. George area, came into some of our prime winter range, the area called Bunker Pass, which is way out in the middle of nowhere, but right on the Utah border and much more accessible from Utah than from Nevada.
mm,
And a lot of these bucks from Nevada and Utah go down and will rut in this country. And you know how we don't hunt deer for the most part during the rut because they just get that dumb.
mm.
You can drive up to a big group of bucks and does during the rut, and they could not care less that you're there. They're doing their thing. They're fighting. They're pushing does around. Whereas 3 weeks before that, you come within half a mile of them and they're running. So we don't hunt deer for the most part, except for a few units and a few tags during the rut, because it would just be too easy. They're just sitting there on the side of the road, and everyone would kill a big buck, and there
Mm.
wouldn't be any deer left.
That's
So
the only time we
this
can hunt
kid came
eastern whitetails, because that's the only time we can get them, because they're too dang smart any other time. So we need to get them when they're dumb.
out here. I mean, we use our eyes for the most part. We're glassing, across
Yeah.
basins
So
and
different.
then sneaking in on them.
Yeah.
So this kid came across during the rut in December, and there was a giant buck. He was roughly 200 inches, just sitting on the side of the road. He got out, shot it, um, cut its head off, and then went back to Utah, took some photographs of the deer, and figured he'd gotten away with it. Figured, 2 years have passed. I'm probably good to go. No one knew about it. And we got a tip. We got a tip that told us, hey, this kid, actually, no, I'm going to backtrack from that. Utah got a tip. And this goes into the fact that these states, we work really well together, especially with populations that are closer to my area I patrol than Las Vegas or some of our metropolitan areas. So Utah got a tip that said, hey, here's a photograph of this buck that he killed. And he killed this deer in Utah during December when there were no hunts. And so Utah started looking at it and pulled what, this is the one technology I'll get into a little bit that we utilize, but most people know about this now, but photographs contain metadata, right? So if you snap a photograph, a lot of times there's a GPS coordinate that comes with that. So they started looking at the metadata of this photograph and said, hey, that's in Nevada. That's not in Utah. So they called us up and said, hey, you know, we got this photograph, we got this tip. It looks like this really big, beautiful deer was killed out in Nevada in 2017. And we started looking at the statutes and knew we had less than a year left to get this thing investigated, get it submitted, and get it prosecuted before the statute of limitations expired, which would have been 3 years. So we immediately went to the GPS coordinate that was on that, on the metadata of that photograph, and found the carcass missing the head. I mean, at this point it was bones and stuff, but we were able to match up that photograph again to a rock that was on the ground and the bush and the bones that were still there, and a tree that come across in front of it. And we actually collected that little branch that matched up exactly to the photograph as evidence. That's collected awesome. The bones, and put together a tremendous case on this one. And after, I think it took us about 3 months to do all of our interviews and find out about this deer. We went and interviewed him. He denied it and lawyered up right away and said, you guys don't have nothing, get off my property. And that was a lot. He was in Utah, so we did that along with Utah. And we ended up taking that case, presenting it to the district attorney. District attorney said, yeah, let's go with this. Prosecuted it. Our witnesses, I'm not going to divulge who they are, but our witnesses were fantastic in this case. There's so much pressure from individuals who commit crimes on those individuals. A lot of times these people, you know, can be really intimidating, and a lot of people don't want to come forward with that information because they are afraid of the consequences and repercussions that can come from being a snitch or a narc or whatever. Right. But the witnesses in this case were completely willing to do whatever they needed to do to bring this to a prosecution. The individual wasn't alone when this happened, so there was someone with him that was willing to talk about it, and just completely instrumental. That I can't give that person enough credit, and I wish I could give them more credit, but I'm going to leave them out of it. So they were willing to testify. We went to the prelim trial and went really well. The problem right now with COVID and all this is that we have a hard time doing jury trials. They don't want juries sitting in boxes next to each other in tight spaces. So I think district attorneys right now have more of a motivation to plead things out, and to not take it to a trial. And so this case was pled down, and we were really sad about that. I felt it was a solid felony if we could have got it to a jury, and really given them all the facts of the case and showing them how big the deer was and how important that resource is to our county. it would have been a Lincoln County trial. The people here know how important that resource is to our county. Economically, aesthetically, everything. I mean, a buck like that doesn't come around a lot. So what ended up happening was they pled it down to a gross misdemeanor. So the felony wasn't on the table anymore. And then a $15,000 fine, which is a significant amount of money. And then he had to give the head back to us. And we went to sentencing, and I think props to the judge on this one, but we don't usually get jail time from our cases. Usually you work really hard on a case and you think, man, this one deserves, this guy needs to spend a little bit of time in jail for what he did. And it wasn't even recommended from the district attorney, but the judge said $15,000 fine, gross misdemeanor, 100 hours of community service, and 20 days in jail. And everyone was like, wow, that's incredible. 20 days in jail. I mean, a lot of times money, especially if someone's pretty affluent, doesn't mean a lot.
Right.
Daddy will take care of it, whatever. I don't feel this. I don't feel, the punishment for what I did, but 20 days in jail for a young kid, that matters to them. So he ended up getting a 20-day jail sentence, and he's actually serving that right now. So, yeah, tremendous case.
Yeah.
Brought that one to prosecution. It ended up being a gross misdemeanor, and we wanted it to be a felony, but that 20 days in jail is just as sweet.
That's huge. That's huge. And hopefully that'll change. And you're right. Jail time and losing your hunting privileges are the two things that level out the playing field if you have a lot of money, because those guys usually don't mind paying the fines, but when they lose their hunting privileges, because most of them love to hunt, or they got to go to jail, that just levels the playing field. Now it doesn't matter who you are or how much money you have, those things affect you. So, and I think that's good when it comes to wildlife law enforcement, that we have those tools. And like you said, you brought up the compact, the North American Law Enforcement Compact, where if they lose their license in your state and we have similar rules, they lose their license everywhere that has similar rules. So, and we all have,
like Rhode Island, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
One state that doesn't recognize that or something?
One side, the last I knew, I think it was New Jersey, and don't quote me, they were working on getting that rectified. Massachusetts and New Jersey, I believe, were our last ones, and they were both in process. So I'm not sure where that stands today. I'll have to do an update on that, but and maybe even talk about that on Warden's Watch with some of the founders of that pack, because that came out of International Wildlife Crime Stoppers. Some of the founding members started that, and just to see it come together is huge, because it's Canada, North America, and it takes your hunting privileges away everywhere. It's just not in your state, because that used to be the big thing. I lose my licenses, I go to the next state and go hunting here. Yeah, you can't do that anymore. You really lose your license. You really lose your hunting privileges, period. And that means a lot to people that enjoy hunting in the outdoors. To have that effect on them certainly is a big deal. So I have to go to Africa or somewhere else if they're that affluent. So
Mexico, a lot of them do go to Mexico these days.
Really? Huh.
There's a lot of really good coos deer and mule deer hunting in Mexico. So a lot of them go down there to still hunt. But I've worked some tremendous cases. And maybe hit me up in about a year, and I'll tell you about the one that's going through the court right now.
Yeah, you got a lot in process, which will be really cool.
Started off as one, and I think that case has morphed into five different big game animals that have been poached. So stay tuned.
Yeah, and any sheep in that too? Because I'd love to hear a sheep case at some point.
Man, we don't get a lot of really nefarious cases with sheep. Our sheep hunters, I mean, our success rate is like 90% or greater.
Wow.
Most of the guys that draw those sheep tags are, they've been putting in for 20, 30 years and take it really seriously and really know what they're doing. You don't get you don't get your casual hunter, your weekend warrior out on the sheep hunt usually.
Right.
So I mean, we definitely worked some pretty good cases, but nothing in my area.
Mm.
Nothing that I've been instrumental enough in to be able to talk about.
Yeah. I know Colorado had put some Operation Game Thief information out there on a sheep case that they were looking into. So, but yeah, different animals have different, like you said, different investigations, different, I just haven't had a sheep case yet. So I guess I'm going to start looking for a sheep case. So maybe another warden will hear this on the Warden's Watch podcast and say, hey, I got a good sheep case. Reach out just like Victor did with your cases, John. And I certainly really appreciate that because, yeah, we had some dynamic stories today. And thank you so much for sharing your growing up, and your dad allowing you to share his story. I think that's an awesome transformation type story, and to see a different way about coming about it. That survivalistship, that sustaining type mentality probably started off with your dad, and not really thinking. But yeah, and again, being super honest and admitting to the game wardens that was him the night before. That says a lot right there. And then having that effect on you as a young kid, and then turning around in Alaska by participating and getting out there and sneaking and peeking, the watching, sitting on the mountaintop, glassing what those guys are doing, and getting that fire built up in you and saying, man, this is something I like, and continue 9 years of investigation and putting these cases together for the state of Nevada, but for everybody that loves resources, wildlife resources. It's just a awesome thing that we all do because we all have a passion for it. And no, thanks a lot for sharing, because it's very special, and that background especially was very special. So appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Thanks again, man.